The metallic click of handcuffs echoed across Westmont Academy's pristine parking lot as Officer Martinez placed his hand on the young teacher's shoulder. "You have the right to remain silent," he said, his voice carrying the weight of official procedure. 17-year-old Bryce Ashford stood 10 feet away, his Instagram livestream already climbing past 2,000 viewers and rising fast. "Told you guys I'd get this witch teacher fired," he smirked into his phone's camera, designer sneakers planted confidently on the asphalt. Daddy's connections work every time. But when Officer Martinez requested identification, Miss Elena Carter calmly reached for her wallet. The driver's license displayed clearly, Elena Michelle Carter Blackwood. Bryce's face suddenly drained of color. That was the daughter of federal Judge Blackwood, the same judge who had ruled against his family in a corruption scandal just 3 months earlier. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, I want to take just a moment to say thank you for being here. Stories like Elena's need to be heard, and you make that possible. If this story moves you, touches your heart, or reminds you of someone who's faced similar struggles, please consider leaving a comment below. Your experiences and thoughts create a community where everyone feels less alone. Every share, every like, helps us reach more people who need to hear that they're not powerless, that bullies don't always win, and that sometimes the underdogs write the best endings. 3 weeks earlier, Elena Carter had walked through Westmont Academy's marble-floored entrance for the first time. Her briefcase containing lesson plans she'd spent the entire summer perfecting. The elite private school in Marin County served as a playground for tech billionaires' children, where parking lots gleamed with Ferraris, and where a single family's donation could fund an entire academic department. Elena knew she was walking into a world where last names carried more weight than teaching credentials, but she'd earned her position through merit, not connections. Her first day teaching advanced English had gone smoothly until third period, when Bryce Ashford sauntered in 15 minutes late, earbuds still in his ears. The classroom fell silent as he made his way to his seat, other students automatically deferring to his presence. Elena had researched her students beforehand. Bryce's father, Richard, owned one of Silicon Valley's most influential tech companies and served as chairman of Westmont's board of directors. "Mr. Ashford," Elena said evenly, "please remove your earbuds and take out your copy of Gatsby." Bryce looked up with practiced indifference. "Didn't bring it. Besides, I already read this book in 9th grade." Elena noticed the way other students watched this exchange, some with anticipation, others with worry. This was clearly a test. "That's fine. You can share with Madison." The brunette girl beside him, Madison Chen, daughter of a pharmaceutical heiress, slid her book toward Bryce with a sweet smile. Elena continued her lesson about the symbolism of the green light, but she could feel Bryce's eyes on her, measuring, calculating. The real trouble began 2 days later, when Elena handed back graded essays. Bryce stared at the large red C- on his paper, his jaw tightening. After class, he approached her desk with the kind of swagger that came from never facing real consequences. "There's obviously been a mistake," he said, sliding the essay across her desk. "I need this changed to an A." Elena looked up from organizing her files. "I don't see any mistake. Your thesis lacked support, your citations were incomplete, and your conclusion didn't address the prompt." "Look, Ms. Carter." Bryce leaned against her desk, voice dropping to what he probably thought was intimidating. My dad practically owns this school. One phone call from him, and you'll be teaching at some public school in Oakland. Change the grade." Elena set down her pen and met his eyes directly. "Mr. Ashford, grades are earned through effort and understanding, not family connections. If you'd like to improve this grade, you can rewrite the essay following the feedback I've provided." Bryce's face flushed red. You have no idea who you're messing with. Actually, Elena said calmly, I think I have a pretty good idea. That afternoon, Elena sat in her small apartment, grading papers by the light of her desk lamp. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Teaching's a dangerous job. Hope nothing bad happens to pretty new teachers. She screenshot the message and added it to a growing digital folder she'd labeled simply Documentation. The next morning brought the first real escalation. Elena arrived at school to find her classroom door covered in printouts, memes mocking her appearance, fake news articles claiming she'd been fired from her previous job for incompetence, and crude drawings that made her stomach turn. Principal Davidson stood nearby, wringing his hands nervously. "Oh dear," he muttered, "vandalism is so unfortunate. I'll have maintenance clean this up right away." Elena pulled out her phone and began photographing everything. "I'd like to file a formal complaint. This constitutes harassment of a faculty member." Davidson's face went pale. "Now, Ms. Carter, let's not blow this out of proportion. I'm sure it's just teenage pranks. You know how kids can be." As Elena carefully documented each image, she noticed something interesting. Her hands weren't shaking. The steady composure that had served her through years of legal proceedings kicked in automatically. She spoke each photo number aloud as she took it, creating an audio timestamp. Most teachers would have been rattled, but Elena Carter had dealt with far worse pressure in federal courtrooms. During lunch, Elena discovered that her school email had been compromised. Fake messages had been sent from her account to male students, containing inappropriate suggestions for private tutoring sessions. Her inbox was flooded with responses from confused parents and concerned administrators. The sophistication of the hack surprised her. This wasn't amateur teenage mischief. Elena immediately contacted IT support, but the damage was spreading fast. Screenshots of the fake emails were circulating on social media, tagged with Predator Teacher and #Westmont Scandal. She watched her professional reputation being systematically dismantled in real time. That evening, Elena made a phone call to a number she'd memorized but hoped never to use. The voice that answered was crisp, professional. "Secure line, go ahead." "Package confirmed," Elena said quietly. "Situation escalating as predicted." "Copy that. Documentation protocols in effect. Handler standing by." Elena ended the call and returned to grading papers. But her coffee cup, bearing the faded logo of the Northern District Federal Courthouse, sat conspicuously on her desk. Most people would assume it was a tourist souvenir, but the worn edges suggested daily use in an environment few teachers had access to. The harassment campaign intensified throughout the week. Elena arrived at school one morning to find her car tires slashed and "Resign" spray-painted across her windshield. Security cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned during the night. When she reported the vandalism, Principal Davidson suggested she might want to park off campus to avoid future incidents. During her third-period class, Elena noticed students receiving text messages simultaneously, their faces lighting up with cruel amusement. Within minutes, her lesson was interrupted by constant phone notifications. Someone had created a fake social media account in her name, posting increasingly explicit content and claiming to be looking for our young male companionship. Elena's training kicked in. Instead of showing distress, she calmly collected phones from the front row and examined the posts. Her voice remained steady as she addressed the class. "It appears someone has created fraudulent social media accounts using my name and image. This constitutes identity theft under federal law, as well as cyberbullying under state education codes. I'll be forwarding all evidence to the appropriate authorities." Bryce shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His confidence seemed to waver slightly, when Elena mentioned federal law, though he quickly recovered his smirk. As Elena quietly activated a voice recording app on her phone, she remembered the digital evidence tools that professional investigators relied on. Timestamp encryption software helped protect recordings from being challenged in court, while automatically backing up to secure cloud servers to prevent data loss. These specialized platforms had become essential for anyone documenting harassment or building legal cases in the digital age. The next escalation came during her planning period. Elena walked into her classroom to find her desk drawers had been rifled through, personal items scattered across the floor. But the real shock was what had been planted there. An opened condom package, deliberately placed where anyone entering would see it. Elena immediately called campus security, knowing the discovery would be reported to administration within minutes. She photographed everything exactly as she'd found it, then carefully bagged the planted evidence using tissues. Her movements were precise, methodical, the actions of someone who understood chain of custody procedures. Principal Davidson arrived with 2 security guards, his face a mask of false concern. "Oh my goodness, Ms. Carter, this is quite disturbing." "Yes," Elena replied evenly, "especially since my classroom was locked and only administration has master keys." Davidson's face reddened. "Surely you're not suggesting that school personnel would—" "I'm not suggesting anything," Elena interrupted. "I'm documenting facts and requesting a formal investigation into who had access to my classroom." That afternoon brought the parent meeting Elena had been dreading. Richard Ashford strode into Principal Davidson's office like he owned it, which, considering his donations, he practically did. The man radiated the kind of power that came from never hearing the word no from anyone who mattered. "Ms. Carter," Richard's voice was smooth, controlled. "I think we need to have a frank discussion about your teaching methods." Elena sat calmly, her hands folded in her lap. She'd deliberately chosen a seat that faced the door, a positioning habit that most people wouldn't notice, but that spoke to extensive security training. "Your son is a bright student," Elena replied. "With proper effort, he could excel in my class." Richard leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Bryce tells me you've been singling him out, harassing him about his grades. That's not the kind of environment we expect at Westmont." "I hold all my students to the same academic standards, Mr. Ashford. No exceptions." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Richard's smile never wavered, but his eyes hardened. "Ms. Carter, I want you to understand something. I've donated over $2 million to this school. I sit on the board of directors. I have friends at the State Education Department, the Accreditation Board, even the Department of Education itself." Elena met his gaze steadily. "That's impressive. When I make a phone call, people listen. When I express concerns about a teacher's performance, those concerns are taken very seriously." Richard leaned forward. "I'd hate for your career to suffer over a simple misunderstanding about grades." Elena's voice remained calm, but something shifted in her posture, a subtle straightening that suggested she was far from intimidated. "Mr. Ashford, are you threatening my employment because I refuse to change your son's grade?" "I'm explaining reality," Richard said. "You're new here. You don't understand how things work." Elena smiled slightly, an expression that would have been reassuring if not for the steel behind her eyes. "Actually, I understand exactly how things work. I also understand federal laws regarding educational intimidation and corruption." For the first time in the conversation, Richard looked uncertain. Something about Elena's phrasing, the precision of her language, suggested she wasn't just another easily intimidated teacher. Principal Davidson, who had remained silent during the exchange, finally spoke up. Perhaps we should all take some time to cool down and reconsider our positions. Elena stood gracefully. My position hasn't changed, gentlemen. Academic integrity isn't negotiable. As she walked toward the door, Richard called after her. Miss Carter, I hope you don't come to regret this conversation. Elena paused at the threshold. Threats made in the presence of witnesses tend to be problematic in legal proceedings, Mr. Ashford. I'd be more careful about my word choice if I were you. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving two powerful men suddenly unsure of themselves. Elena Carter was proving to be very different from the timid new teacher they'd expected to easily manipulate. The weekend brought an ominous calm, but Elena knew it was merely the eye of the storm. Monday morning arrived with news that would push the conflict beyond the point of no return. Elena discovered that explicit photos, clearly doctored but convincing to untrained eyes, had been posted across multiple social media platforms, tagged with her name and the school's location. The images suggested inappropriate relationships with students, complete with fake text message conversations. Elena's phone buzzed with calls from concerned parents, angry board members, and local news outlets that had somehow gotten wind of the story. Principal Davidson left 3 increasingly frantic voicemails before 8 a.m., each one more desperate than the last. At school, Elena found herself escorted to Davidson's office by 2 security guards, ostensibly for her protection, but the optics were clear. She was being treated like a suspect rather than a victim. The hallways buzzed with whispered conversations as students stared openly at her. Miss Carter, Davidson began, his hands trembling slightly as he shuffled papers on his desk. The board has asked me to place you on administrative leave, pending a full investigation into these allegations. Elena sat calmly, her posture unchanged despite the circumstances. What specific allegations are being investigated? Well, the photos, the inappropriate messages, the complaints about your conduct. Davidson trailed off, unable to meet her eyes. Elena pulled out her phone and began recording. For the record, Principal Davidson, you are suspending me based on fabricated evidence that I have already reported as harassment. Is that correct? Davidson's face went white. You can't record this conversation without my consent. Actually, Elena replied with the same calm precision that had marked all her interactions, California is a 2-party consent state for private conversations. However, this is an official disciplinary proceeding at a public institution, which falls under different legal standards. The accuracy of her legal knowledge seemed to unnerve Davidson even more. Most teachers wouldn't know the specific recording laws, let alone cite them with such confidence. Elena's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Still think you're untouchable? Check the parking lot. She excused herself from the meeting and walked toward the main entrance, her heels clicking steadily against the marble floor. Through the glass doors, she could see a crowd gathering around her car. As she stepped outside, her heart sank, but not for the reasons the perpetrators expected. Her Honda Civic had been vandalized beyond recognition. Windows smashed, tires slashed, and across the windshield, someone had spray-painted "Predator" in red letters. But Elena's expression remained controlled as she pulled out her phone and began documenting the damage systematically. "Holy cow," whispered a nearby student. "She's not even crying." What the gathering crowd didn't notice was how Elena positioned herself while taking photos, always keeping potential threats in her peripheral vision, never turning her back to the crowd, maintaining clear sightlines to exits. These weren't the movements of a panicked teacher. They were the calculated actions of someone with extensive tactical training. Bryce Ashford emerged from the crowd, his phone held high, live streaming the scene to his rapidly growing audience. "There she is, guys," he announced to his viewers. "The perverted teacher who's been harassing students. Look at her car. That's what happens to predators at our school." Elena looked directly at his camera lens. "Mr. Ashford, are you confessing to vandalism on a live broadcast?" Bryce's smirk faltered for just a moment. "I didn't do anything. I'm just documenting what happens to teachers who cross the line." Elena continued photographing the damage, her voice steady as she spoke. "I'm documenting evidence of criminal harassment and destruction of property. This footage will be very helpful for the police investigation." While Elena waited for backup documentation from courthouse records, she realized the importance of legal data preservation platforms. Blockchain-based evidence storage systems didn't just ensure data integrity, but also provided cryptographic proof of tampering attempts, essential for federal court proceedings and civil rights violations. These specialized platforms had become crucial tools for anyone building cases involving institutional corruption or systematic harassment. The situation reached its breaking point that afternoon when Elena was confronted in the faculty parking lot by Bryce and two of his friends. The encounter was brief but telling. When Bryce stepped aggressively into her personal space, Elena's reaction was swift and controlled. She sidestepped his advance with fluid precision, leaving him stumbling forward while she maintained perfect balance. "Whoa," one of his friends muttered. "Where did that come from?" Elena's movements had been subtle but unmistakably trained. Most people wouldn't recognize defensive tactics, but her positioning and reaction time suggested extensive martial arts or law enforcement training. "Stay away from me, Ms. Carter," Bryce snarled, trying to regain his composure, "or you'll regret it." Elena's response was measured, precise. "Mr. Ashford, that statement constitutes a direct threat against a faculty member. I'm adding it to my formal complaint." That evening, Elena made another encrypted phone call. "Package status update. Subjects escalating as predicted. Ready for Phase 2. Copy that. Federal assets in position. Proceed with final documentation." Elena pulled a manila envelope from her briefcase and removed an official-looking badge. Not a teacher's ID, but something that carried far more authority. The next morning brought the culmination of weeks of systematic harassment. Elena arrived at school to find police cars in the parking lot and Officer Martinez waiting by the main entrance. Principal Davidson stood nearby, wringing his hands and looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Ms. Elena Carter?" Officer Martinez asked, approaching with handcuffs visible on his belt. "Yes, officer. You're under arrest for assault on a minor. You have the right to remain silent." As the handcuffs clicked into place, Elena's demeanor remained unnaturally calm. She didn't protest, didn't cry, didn't demand to call a lawyer. Her composed acceptance of the situation was unsettling to everyone watching. Bryce appeared as if on cue, his phone already live-streaming to over 2,000 viewers. "Told you guys I'd get this witch teacher fired," he announced triumphantly. "Daddy's connections work every time." Elena caught his eye and smiled slightly, an expression that should have been reassuring but somehow carried an edge of anticipation. "Ma'am, I need to see some identification," Officer Martinez said, his voice carrying a hint of uncertainty that hadn't been there moments earlier. Elena nodded toward her purse. "In my wallet, officer." Martinez retrieved the driver's license and read the name aloud. Elena Michelle Carter Blackwood. The effect was immediate and devastating. Bryce's live stream audience exploded with comments. "Wait, that's Judge Blackwood's daughter. Holy cow, they just arrested a federal judge's kid. Ashford family is screwed." Richard Ashford's Mercedes pulled into the parking lot at exactly the wrong moment. He stepped out expecting to witness his son's victory, only to hear Officer Martinez reading that name, the name that had haunted his family for months. Blackwood? Richard's voice cracked slightly. As in Federal Judge Margaret Blackwood? Elena met his eyes directly. My father will be very interested to hear about this arrest, Mr. Ashford, especially given your family's ongoing federal investigation. The live stream audience watched in real time as Richard Ashford's face went through several shades of pale. Bryce looked between his father and Elena, finally understanding that he'd made a catastrophic miscalculation. Officer Martinez was already on his radio. Dispatch, I need federal notification protocols. We have a situation involving a federal judge's family member. Within minutes, black SUVs arrived. Federal agents emerged, their presence transforming the scene from a local arrest to something far more significant. Agent Sarah Kim approached Officer Martinez with credentials that made the local cop step back respectfully. We'll be taking custody of this situation, Agent Kim announced. Ms. Carter Blackwood is a federal compliance monitor working undercover to investigate educational corruption. Elena's handcuffs were removed as Agent Kim continued. Mr. Bryce Ashford, you're under arrest for filing a false police report, harassment of a federal officer, and conspiracy to obstruct a federal investigation. The live stream was still running as Bryce found himself being cuffed instead. His 2,000 viewers watched his smug confidence transform into panic as the reality of his situation became clear. "Dad!" Bryce called out as Agent Kim read him his rights. "Do something!" But Richard Ashford was backing away, his own legal troubles suddenly multiplying. Elena's true identity meant that every threat, every intimidation attempt, every abuse of power had been committed against someone with direct connections to federal law enforcement. Elena retrieved her federal badge from the manila envelope in her car, clipping it to her jacket as news crews arrived. The parking lot had become a circus of flashing lights and shouting reporters. This is Sarah Chen reporting live from Westmont Academy, where what began as a teacher harassment case has exploded into a federal investigation. 6 months later, the transformation was complete. Bryce Ashford was serving 18 months in juvenile detention for multiple federal charges. Richard Ashford's tech empire was under federal oversight. His government contracts permanently revoked. Westmont Academy had undergone complete administrative restructuring under federal supervision. Elena Carter Blackwood sat in her car outside another elite private school, this one in Connecticut. Her new teacher credentials bore a different name, but her mission remained the same. The manila envelope beside her contained another federal badge and a fresh identity. Her phone buzzed with the text from an encrypted number. New package ready for delivery. Asset reports suspicious activities at Hartford Preparatory. Board meeting scheduled for next month. Proceed as planned. Elena smiled as she looked up at the imposing facade of her next assignment. Somewhere inside those hallowed halls, another privileged student was probably bullying someone they considered beneath them, never imagining that their newest teacher might be watching, documenting, building a case that would bring down their entire corrupt system. As she walked toward the entrance of Hartford Preparatory, Elena's voice carried clearly in the crisp autumn air. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way, others require a federal case.